My name is Brian Marr. I am the co-chair of the Minority New York State Assembly Task Force on Human Trafficking and Exploitation, joined today by our co-chair, Mary Beth Walsh, Assembly Member Mary Beth Walsh, and our host, Mr. Assemblyman David DiPietro. So we are going to start with introductions, and then we typically have done some breakout sessions where we'll kind of group everybody into smaller sections. I think for this group, we're going to stay at the same table and have everybody contribute to the 4 breakout discussions we're going to have. But before we get going and kind of talk a little bit about how this got established, I would love to have my colleagues introduce themselves, starting with our co-chair, Assemblywoman Mary Beth Walsh.
Well, thank you, Brian. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for taking some time out to be a part of this really important discussion today. I have been an Assembly member for 8 years. I represent the 112th Assembly District, which is mostly Saratoga County, a little bit of Schenectady County, a little bit of Fulton County, but I'm looking forward to our discussion today. This will be, we did our Capital Region task force just a short while ago, and we'll be doing another one in Syracuse on Friday. So I'm looking forward to hearing the discussion and hopefully coming up with some good ideas that we can incorporate into our report, and hopefully some legislative ideas and budgetary ideas that we can put forward. So thank you very much, all.
Thank you. Our host?
Hi, everyone. Dave DiPietro, the Assemblyman for this district, and I want to thank you all for being here today. Human trafficking is a crime that preys on the silent and the unseen. It's difficult to quantify just how pervasive it is because so many victims remain unheard in the shadows. The recent New York State Interagency Task Force report from 2022, just a couple years ago, shed some light on this issue, but the numbers, 249 confirmed cases, 622 victims reported to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, are just the tip of the iceberg. For every person we know of, how many more are out there still suffering? Our task force is here to explore what more New York can do to combat this horrific crime. By working together with the experts, law enforcement, and local advocates present today, we can develop stronger strategies to support survivors and, most importantly, prevent more people from falling into the hands of traffickers. This is a grave issue that touches our communities, and it's one we cannot afford. And with that, I just want to let you know that my wife, she's been to Thailand a bunch of years ago on the human trafficking effort, and our family's been involved in it for probably a dozen years now, so it's near to us.
Thank you for that.
Thanks.
Thank you to your wife.
Thank you.
And thank you for raising your hand to host.
Yes.
Assemblymember DiPietro was the first Assembly member to say, I want to host this in my district, so we appreciate that, and that is why we're here. Sir?
You keep calling me sir. Anyways, thank you all for coming. We do this as a conference a lot. We have done it for opioids, we have done it for domestic violence, we have done it for school safety. These things are done in a very nonpartisan way, and the report that we bring back to our conference and then we bring back to the entire assembly is usually a model for how we make change. And as change agents, as stakeholders, it's very important to us that we hear what you have to say so that we understand where the problem is and how far it goes. We all think we know what we're talking about, but not always. So therefore, your help and your contribution will be immeasurable as we move forward and try to change things. So I thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Josh Jensen. I represent 134th Assembly District, which is 3 towns in Monroe County, the towns of Greece, Ogden, and Parma. I also serve as the ranking member of the Assembly's Health Committee. And I just want to thank Brian and Mary Beth for co-chairing this, for Dave for hosting it, the supervisor of Marilla for welcoming us, and also for our minority leader, Will Barkley, to gild the lily on what Joe Giglio said, that allows our conference to go out there and talk to subject matter experts. Oftentimes, if any of you pay attention to what happens in Albany, unfortunately, it's sometimes politicians using their best judgment and wisdom to enact law. And what we've seen is sometimes where those policies fail is when we didn't listen to subject matter experts. And so I think it's so important and so great that our conference does these task forces, not to allow us to tell you what should be happening, but allowing all of you to say, listen, this is the experience that I've done, whether it's what I'm passionate about, what I've devoted my life to, and this is how we can do better and serve better and fix the faults in our state. And I just want to thank all of you for sharing your wisdom, your experiences with us, so that we can help to hopefully affect change in this very, very critically important area.
Thank you. We will go around the room, but just to give you an idea of how this task force got established, a little more than a year ago now, there was a public hearing in New York City where we listened to nonprofit organizations, law enforcement, and survivors of trafficking. Some of us from our conference were present there, and we were just alarmed at what we learned, what we saw, what we heard. And for us, we decided to take action by educating ourselves. And the best way for us to do that is to talk to individuals like you, travel around the state, which we have been doing, and eventually put together a report, which we hope to do before the end of the year, the early part of next year, that will create some legislative funding recommendations, both at the state and the federal level from what we've been seeing. This trip was particularly special because yesterday we got to meet with U.S. Customs and Border Control, and we have seen a 50% increase in crossings on the northern border, specifically here in New York State. And we also learned yesterday that there are 120, more than 120 persons of interest that have been tagged here on the northern border, and that is more than the southern border. So that is something that we definitely know. There are some bad actors that are looking to exploit individuals, and the more that we learn, the more we can hopefully convince our colleagues and our partners in service to enact laws that can help make a meaningful difference. So that is the goal, to not waste your time today, to value you guys taking your time away from doing your jobs to help people and to serve, to be here to talk to us. That is a responsibility we take seriously, and that is our goal. So I will now turn it over to this side of the room for you guys to say hello, introduce yourselves, and then we will get into our breakout discussions.
Hi, I'm Dr. John Carlone. I don't have a lot of expertise in this level of abuse that's been occurring in our country. I am just appalled at the fact that any authorities would leave a border open for so many years, allowing this to fester and what it's done. It has festered from what I've read. As I say, I'm no expert on it. It's beyond my field of expertise in medicine. However, I hope it comes to an end and we can clear things in the way things are done in this country. I hope it ends. Thank you.
Thank you.
Why don't we just welcome the folks coming in and help them get their seats.
Absolutely. As our arrivals come on in, we'll just kind of keep going with introductions, but we will start right here with Rachel.
Hi.
Go ahead, Rachel.
My name is Rachel Sandal-Sacco. I'm the Rape Crisis Program Supervisor for the YWCA of the Niagara Frontier in Lockport.
Awesome. All you missed was a couple politicians just talking, so you're good right now.
Everybody's favorite thing.
I think it was planned.
Perfect timing.
Yes, exactly.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Shelley Hitzel. I am the Executive Director at the Child Advocacy Center in Niagara County. We coordinate our county's multidisciplinary response to child abuse investigations, and we also coordinate the county's child fatality review team and Safe Harbor program.
Thank you for being here.
Hi everyone, my name is Natalie Lesniak. I'm an accredited representative at Volunteer Lawyers Project in Buffalo. We provide free legal services, family, immigration, tax. I primarily work in our immigration department, working with survivors of human trafficking.
Thank you for being here.
Hi, I'm Nicole Duffin. I just recently responded. I got the notice a little bit late. I just have some information here from what I've been seeing in the ground in Allentown, some of the things that I think are impacting and targeting children.
Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Kaylee Fazer. I'm a social worker with the Child Advocacy Program of Chautauqua County. I oversee our Safe Harbor program, which is our New York State response to anti-trafficking. I've been involved with the program since 2016, and I'm a trauma therapist with survivors of trafficking in Chautauqua County.
Thank you.
And I'm Sarah Den Randall. I'm the Safe Harbor Coordinator at the Child Advocacy Program in Chautauqua County. Kaylee and I work together, and previously I worked with domestic violence and sexual assault victims.
Hi, I'm Tiffany Pavone. I'm Director of Victim Services for Child and Family Services, which includes Haven House, our domestic violence program, but also we're the Safe Harbor youth trafficking program in Erie County.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Victoria Tieber. I am the Executive Director of Wyoming County Community Action. We have over 70 programs that help families, individuals, and children in any need that they might come to be in through just vulnerability, through the human condition. So I'm here to learn. Thank you.
Thanks, Becky.
I'm Marilla Crane. I am the Domestic Violence Coordinator for the Wyoming County District Attorney's Office. I am one of 2 individuals who handle victim services for Wyoming County.
You got the Wyoming County. So my name's Andrea Aldinger, and I have a lot of different hats. One of them is the Director of the Youth Bureau that houses the Safe Harbor program. We've probably been involved now, I think this is year 4 for us, and I'm going to be quite honest with you. When the grant came out, I looked at it on my desk and I said, we don't have a problem here. I was one of those. And you know, as I started to look at it and learn about it, I was horrified, like you, Doctor, of, you know, what's going on, but mostly what it looks like in a rural area is so different. You know, when I tell people that I do this, they're like, oh, like the movie, what's it called? Taken. Taken. I'm like, no, not like the movie Taken here. It doesn't look like that here. Hopefully we'll get to talk a little bit more, but I do want to invite you all. In 2 weeks, we are having a Safe Harbor Forum that is going to be incredible. We've got over 100 folks coming, law enforcement, school nurses, community members, and we actually have a guest speaker from Niagara, so to all of you over there, who is familial trafficking is also a problem. Yes. And she's coming with her trauma therapist. I love that term. And they are kind of they're going to really teach us what it looks like. So you are more than welcome, and talk to us after if you're interested. But thanks for having me.
Thank you.
I'm Kelly Nickerson. I'm the Wyoming County Safe Harbor Coordinator through the Youth Bureau. I'm also the Youth Program Coordinator. Thank you for the invite.
Good morning, I'm Katie Gavin. I'm the First Deputy Commissioner for Erie County Social Services. I oversee the continuum of child welfare, which includes child protection, which is what most people are familiar with, as well as adult protection.
Dan Howard, New York State Police. I oversee the Bureau of Criminal Investigations for Troop A, which encompasses the western 8 counties of the state.
Good morning, Lieutenant Mike Connors. I work for Dan.
Good morning, Bill Cooley from the Sheriff's Office. We have 2 detectives that participate on the Western District of New York Human Trafficking Task Force, and we probably have another 6 personnel or so that work in a collateral duty capacity to assist in these investigations.
I'm Julie Palmer. I'm the Executive Director of PATH, which is People Against Trafficking Humans. And I'm the founder of our Enrichment Center, and our mission is education, prevention, and restoration. And so we provide restorative services serving the 8 counties of Western New York at our center in Buffalo, and we serve both teens and adults, and do a mixture of intensive case management along with therapeutic support services, basic needs, and a variety of different ways to help a person meet them where they're at and then restore from being trafficked. And we solely serve traffic victims as well as victims of crime.
8 counties. How much staff do you guys have for 8 counties?
We have 12 paid positions and 35 volunteers.
Thank you for the work you do.
Thank you.
Okay. We have some folks that are here. Thank you for coming. I know we have some staff and just some residents who took special notice and wanted to be here. We appreciate you being here. Thank you. We will have a bit of a free flow of conversation, so if there is anyone here that maybe isn't presently at the dais that would like to chime in, just let me know, give me a tap. The 4 breakout discussions we're going to discuss, I'm going to name them all, just because some of them can be a bit related. So if you want to make a comment on something and maybe you know it's coming later, you'll hold off and we'll focus on that particular area. The first topic is going to be how can New York strengthen support for survivors and communities? And that looks like the nonprofits, that looks like collaborations between law enforcement and faith-based organizations, public service announcements, stuff like that. we really are looking forward to hearing from our nonprofits on this one. The second discussion is going to be what coordination and tools do law enforcement and prosecutors need to better combat traffickers and help victims. The third is going to be what impact is the migrant crisis having on human trafficking crimes within the state. And the fourth is what kinds of education and training are needed to better equip professionals and all New Yorkers to recognize someone who needs help. So 1 and 4 can be a little intertwined, so we'll just make sure if you have any training specific, we'll save that for the last conversation. So we'll open it up to how can New York strengthen support for survivors, and I just want to make sure we have a note taker on one of our boards.
Yes, you gotta.
Oh, you're digital. That's cool. We could do that. Yeah, that works for you. It works for me. It was just more fun using the boards and whatnot, but totally, if you're taking notes, we're good.
For the report.
All right. Okay, how can New Yorkers strengthen support for survivors and communities? Why don't we have any number of our nonprofit reps here get us started?
I'm happy to start.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a list. I think the biggest pervasive need that we're seeing is emergency housing. There really is, well, I got a lot of agreement. All right, I guess I was on target. I think that that's the #1 primary thing that our staff are spending countless hours trying to resource emergency shelter and housing, whether it's with social services or finding resources in the community. And then our organization is ending up spending funds on hotel stays or immediate stays that we don't necessarily have that funding for because the other entity that had it is now no longer providing those services. So I think providing that resource to Western New York is really imperative for the survival and restoration of our victims.
So, go ahead.
No, so I was gonna say, so I know that there's and I might get the name of it wrong, but I think there's it's called Honda. It's about housing our neighbors, it's about a state program that takes abandoned, unused hotels and gives funding and assistance to developers to make them into transitional housing. Is that something where, if to look at places where you've seen sort of a loss of traditional hotels, that it could be the state could come up with a way to say, listen, we're going to focus on transitional housing for survivors, because right now the program is really geared at the unhoused population. We're really kind of finding the high areas where you have people in domestic violence situations where they could be housed in those types of facilities, or not facilities, but residences.
I think there's a difference between emergency housing and transitional housing. Okay. And that's what we're finding is the gap. There's a lot of shelter transitional housing in our community, especially in Erie County, but we're experiencing that phone call that we get at 5 o'clock on a Thursday night where law enforcement is like, I have 6 clients, where are you going to put them? Okay. And so it's a place that's like, yes, right now I will take them, and then it's a situation that's safe and it's well managed and supervised properly to help best serve. Because I think people that are victimized by human trafficking is very different than someone who's homeless. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's a lot of things we need to accommodate for that and consider with that. I think if the state wanted to say, here's some property, go ahead and utilize it, I think PATH would welcome that. Okay. So,
I think
and I'm sure my colleagues here would
I think we would all welcome that, but I think there is a relation between the emergency housing problem and not having enough transitional either, because we have people staying in shelters longer because there's no place to go after they get there, so there's no turnover to be able to take in the next. We see that not just in trafficking, but in domestic violence as well, which is also a specialized community that is different from homeless and more similar to trafficking, and that's the problem, is there's not enough of any of it. And so if you're not leaving the shelter, it's not making room for the next person to come.
We're constantly are available in the rural areas, because for Erie County, we have, many hotels and different options for people within the city and first-ring suburbs. But when we go out and, anyone who's been victimized, whatever that trauma was, does not want to leave where they are most familiar. So finding safe places within the communities that they are familiar with and that their support centers exist within.
Well, and in our rural area, then you have to look at all the outliers, because then transportation
Yes.
becomes a huge barrier for people, because they can't get to the help or get to the programming or get to the services, and therefore don't reach out because they just think that it's futile.
Very good point on transportation for rural areas. Wanted to touch on something, but I know law enforcement was about to comment and then didn't. Do you have something?
Actually, they touched on it, but, so yesterday I met with John Hanna, who's our detective that's assigned to the human trafficking investigations. And, I kind of wrapped up my meeting by asking that question, like, what's the biggest obstacle you overcome? And it was the housing issue, But, with that, I know, kind of parallel, I met with the Village of Hanford mayor last week, and they're utilizing 2 motels in their town, and these are predominantly like DISS, homeless people that are now staying there, and apparently they're not categorized as shelters, so they're there for like 13 days, they have to check out, and then they check back in, and, so logistically it becomes an issue. You're talking about transportation costs and that. My wife's an assistant principal in the city of Buffalo, and some of her students are actually getting bussed in now from Hamburg back into the city of Buffalo. So that creates, a strain on a lot of different.
Can you elaborate on the financials of that, though?
It's my understanding they're being subsidized by DISS, the social services.
Oh, they are. So that's a big chunk.
There's a homeless unit on the, so I don't oversee that part, but the family independent side, there is a homeless unit where a family or an individual person could qualify if they meet certain criteria for hotel stays. And like they indicated, they're short-term stays, and then they do have to check out. And we run, like I can tell you that last week we had an issue in child protection where the family had to check out. Well, then they're all standing in a quick fill all day while we try to figure out a plan, and everybody's scrambling to do that.
So this includes
A lot of them.
the human trafficking also, not just homeless.
It's both, and the thing is that the hotels and the risk of placing people at just a hotel when they've been human trafficked or experienced domestic violence is, are we really separating them from the person or persons who are putting them at risk?
Absolutely.
Would they be able to find them, things like that. So I think that there's a couple different issues.
So, to touch on that, we learned 2 specific things based on what we're hearing about housing and some of the things that we're talking about. The first is, when it comes to hotels, you hit it on the head. We've heard this before. The individuals, whether it's domestic violence or trafficking, they will know where you're at. And also, there are certain elements at certain hotels where maybe you're getting a subsidy to pay for them to come in there. The hotels that accept those subsidies maybe have some underlying issues already that are there. So now you're exposing them to other potential opportunities. And then obviously have that relationship building aspect for both domestic violence and trafficking, where the Stockholm Syndrome, where you kind of are attached to the individual who is...
You don't believe you can survive without them.
Correct. And also the disbelief that you're actually experiencing trafficking and all of that. So as much as hotels is what we do because we have to, because of the housing crisis, I think it should probably be spelled out in our report, and I just want to verify this with all of you, that is not a sustainable solution, and the best solution would be ... And maybe it is vacant properties that we then staff with nonprofit personnel who know how to make this work and treat the individual properly, and yes, that will be expensive, and or some sort of incentive that will create somebody with a heart and a lot of money to invest in it, right? What do you guys think about that?
I think that just to speak on that, with all fairness, social services has a huge amount of clientele they're serving.
Yeah.
And so I do have staff that are texting me at 5 o'clock saying they were there since 9 and still couldn't get placed because they're saturated and they're full.
Yeah.
And so we're finding that. And the other barrier is individuals who don't yet have citizenship. Maybe they're awaiting their T visa because they were a victim of crime in our country, but that takes several years. And so because they have no identification representing them in the United States, that becomes even more challenging. And we have at least a dozen clientele right now that are in that situation, that are kind of hopping around because, and it's no fault to social services, it's just the way that our
Yeah, it's the federal regulations
Yeah, it's the way the
related to-
system
yeah.
functions. So
What-
we're just seeing this regularly occurring.
You do have to be here legally to qualify for the homeless services, whether it's for the hotels and or for any temporary assistance or things like that. There's no federal assistance unless you have the appropriate paperwork. That's what Julie's referring to.
Yeah, and we can get them certified, and we do work on that really hard, and then we work with the attorneys to say, hey, let's get this letter so we can help move them up. But again, there's a challenge because we know the homelessness crisis is so vast, and there's so many issues with that, and so we're seeing that, spill into the DV human trafficking population.
For the regular emergency housing situation, what's the length of stay? Is it 30 days? What is it? How long did it get?
We used to be 30 days, but now we've had to extend it for what you were saying before. We have emergency housing, transitional housing, and permanent housing, and we're full all the time.
I think one of the challenges I feel is that, and Assemblyman DiPietro mentioned the report, is I think that when it comes to human trafficking, whether it's labor trafficking, sex trafficking, it's so underreported that it's difficult to make recommendations like we need this much because it's, you know what I mean? It's like you don't even know, it's hard to justify the need, although you know that the need is there, and saying that you're full all the time. Like I before coming to the Assembly, I was an assistant county attorney prosecuting abuse and neglect cases and working with DSS and working with foster care and working, and I know what those motels look like. In a lot of ways, I felt like they were, despite everybody's best efforts, they were like a perfect storm for other bad things to happen. And even now I represent kids going through the family court system, and and I think it was mentioned at the beginning that the parents who have issues that are feeding a habit or that are themselves in a DV situation are leading their kids into traffic situations. So it's really hard. I mean, it sounds like, I don't know if it's something where we can segment out trafficking victims into specialized housing.
So that's
or not.
obviously would be ideal, right? But go ahead.
I don't think you can.
Yeah.
I mean, the bottom line is they talked about domestic violence and all those other things, and housing is housing. And our problem, I represent Cattaraugus, Allegheny, and Steuben County. So our problem is with Wyoming is geography.
Right.
There's one problem with geography, which leads to the problem with transportation. Crime doesn't differentiate who is who and how they got there. And the final person is, again, transportation. How do we get them the help? And we're limited with help because we don't have the professionals. So you're going to have all those problems facing us. So our enemy is geography. Plus, we don't have a lot of old motels or hotels. So that isn't really an answer to the long-term problem.
Up here,
We're going to, part of the problem is, again, we've talked about this, is funding and directing it where it needed the most. And for us in the rural counties, we need a lot of help, again, with transportation and housing. There has to be a better way than old hotels.
Question for the stakeholders, and this is just from not being in this field, but do survivors of trafficking, when they are segregated from a community in transitional housing, is there a stigma? I can't speak. Yeah. Is there a stigma that they feel when they are segregated from the communities that they know, when they're put into housing, when they're maybe separated from their...
Case by case.
I think from a trauma perspective, we have to consider being separated isn't going to be helpful for them to heal and grow and thrive, but also being a survivor of trafficking is also intersectioned with so many other adversities, right? So if you are a survivor of trafficking, you're likely have experienced so much other trauma and experiences in your life. So picking a trauma survivor out of that situation, like a trafficking survivor, is really impossible.
Okay.
You can't just say okay, all the trafficking survivors, because there are all these other things going on too.
Gotcha.
But do they all need the same services?
No, everybody has an individual need, right? And I think a lot of what we haven't talked about yet is prevention, right? Where are we focusing on is right here. It's meeting this emergent need, which is important, but we see so many littles that are not getting the supports they need as far as housing, food, medication, therapy, education, all these things, which we know prevent trafficking. So if we can be, focusing this conversation too on what can we do from the get-go to alleviate some of these issues.
Our last talking point is going to be
Okay,
education and training. No, it's intersection. It intersects.
Right.
That's why we kind of did 1 and 4, because we want to get started on the conversation, which then lead to the next, law enforcement and everything. But we are going to end with prevention, education, and we want to hear all about that for sure.
Can I make one other comment about the separate shelter and for trafficking victims? I don't think it's much different than domestic violence, right? We have shelters specifically for domestic violence. And is there a stigma that comes along with that? Yes. But when you're trying and you're at the point of wanting to leave and your safety is paramount, the survivors that come into shelter are prioritizing that over knowing they're coming into a domestic violence shelter. And I think the difference between putting someone in a shelter as opposed to a hotel is that it comes with the trauma-informed services that helps them get beyond that and makes them remember that this is just a stepping point and that you're not always going to be here. And the nice thing about a lot of transitional and supportive housing beyond that is, yes, they have set-aside beds for survivors of victimization, but we don't label them as that. So when they move in, they're moving into a general supportive or transitional building, and they've been connected with that supportive services that they need with it. So I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you for
Whatever
that.
housing you come up with should have similar regulations to the domestic violence housing, where those addresses are highly confidential. Because we have had at children's residential centers, we have had traffickers outside.
Okay. Okay, safe homes. For that purpose, funding is a big issue. We want to touch on funding. We'd like to get your specifics aside from preventative services, but the services immediately. What are your biggest funding issues? And when it comes to safe homes, is there a security component? And is that something you guys do on your own, or just that literally you wouldn't be able to fund it? And is that something where maybe the state could come in and provide incentives where it literally might be impossible to keep that location a secret, especially if your victims have close ties with those that are, being victimized too? So if you could talk a little bit about that.
I mean, personally, a thought comes in my mind because we are quite rural. If anything starts getting built, all over online, what's getting built there? What is there?
Yeah.
And everyone knows immediately.
We have one safe house in Chautauqua County that's located in Jamestown that's available for youth, and everybody knows where it is, and that's where all of the bad things happen, is right outside of there. And we often have offenders living there because there's nowhere else for them to go. So until they're adjudicated and there's proof of that, we can't get them out of this situation.
Is there security?
No.
So I know Rachel wanted to add something, and after she gets done, I want to make a point.
One of the restrictions with our funding is that, for example, for rape crisis victims, it has to be, the offender has to be a familial person or a partner of some kind. So if that means a roommate or someone else was the offender, we cannot house them. So that is one of our biggest barriers.
Send that in an email to us right away.
The second thing is, like we were talking about security, we have obviously, cameras, and we have a big, tall fence. But one of the biggest issues we're finding is that they're being tracked with some type of tracking device, and then we have to bring them over to the sheriff's department to have their car scanned. So more technology as far as being able to, because they don't always have time, or they have back-to-back things. So being able to look for some of those things and funding to be able to purchase. I looked it up, and it's a couple $1,000s for one of those devices, and it would be nice to have, to be able to help them with that when they come in.
Shoot us an email on all those things, please. I'll give you the card before we leave.
So I want to ask a question, because apparently my job is to ask stupid questions today. And my grandmother told me there's no stupid questions, there's stupid people, or just stupid people. So I mean, if I'm stupid, I want you all to tell me I'm stupid.
Put that on the record.
Yeah, right, it's on the camera got me. So I grew up playing hockey, and taking an idea from a junior hockey model is that when somebody goes to play junior hockey in Canada, they're assigned a billet family. So it's a family that's been vetted, that has a proven record, been background checked, where they provide essentially a safe place for that individual to call home while they're playing for that junior hockey team. Is that a type of model that in theory, and I see Katie looking at me like, you are a stupid person. But maybe looking at, because we're talking about funding being a problem with creating transitional housing, some of the things that go into the establishment. But is there room for a type of model where we vet partners within a community who will maybe open up an in-law suite, or they will have a space within a home setting where they can have maybe that transportation provided by that family, and it's not somebody that they have any connection to, but it's essentially somebody who opens up their door while this person gets back up. Is that a completely stupid idea?
It's not stupid, but I'm not sure if it'd be realistic.
Okay.
Because their foster families is such a needed resource that asking for people is to be kind. Not that people aren't kind, but we're already struggling with having foster families and homes. That I think that's going to be a challenge.
And I think and I understand your point about because we hear about foster families otherwise, and I think that's where might be a difference is that when you take on a child, especially a younger foster child, there's a lot of overwhelmingly care that needs to be especially for a younger child. Whereas for maybe an adult or closer to their 20s who's been trafficked, maybe there's a different level of support that's needed.
So this has come up over the years for domestic violence. Like people have offered here and there, like, hey, I have an in-law suite or something. I'd be willing to take people in. The problem is that regardless of your age, you're dealing with individuals who are seriously traumatized, right?
Yeah.
And some of them not realizing the level of danger that they are in. And even when we have conversations, we're a confidential domestic violence shelter, right? We try to keep that, we talk about trying to be as confidential as you can. But you're dealing with individuals that are still trying to reel in, grasp with the situation that they're in, that someone that they loved treats them that way, and that they're not necessarily going to keep that confidential because they're still grappling with that, right? And that puts the person that's hosting them at risk as well. So there's that dynamic of, not that it's being done intentionally, because you are dealing with individuals that are traumatized, and we're trying, as professionals, trying to get them to understand that and the realities of the situation that they're in. But if they're not realizing it, then they put those that are hosting them in jeopardy as well.
Absolutely. Plus, like their mental health, like how are they doing emotionally and mentally? Are they struggling with substance use issues? Yeah. So going into someone's home, not only with an exploiter or a perpetrator, but also with the person themselves, are they capable of doing this?
It would be a huge liability.
Okay, well, then we'll chalk it up as stupid idea from a
No,
student.
on its face, it sounds like, why not, right? Yeah.
Creating more foster families on that end, because we know that, again, protecting
That's a good idea.
vulnerable.
And there's like a new foster family rate that is for your highest risk youth who
And more
would be, like,
complex
if we did have a more complex, teenager who maybe we suspected had been involved in trafficking, or maybe we had verified that, we would be looking for a family at that particular rate, because we expect them to literally be full-time caregivers in order to ensure that they get the appropriate supports that they need. So there's sort of a model for it, but I'll tell you that in Erie County, and we're the largest outside of New York City, we only have one of those right now, one of those homes.
So what I'm hearing, go ahead.
Can I just make a point really quick? Because I think that's something we haven't touched, we're starting to touch on, but we haven't really touched on, whether we're talking about youth that are confirmed trafficking victims or are high risk for commercial sexual exploitation, adults who are survivors of human trafficking, domestic violence. It's layered, right? Them being a survivor is just one piece of all of the other things that they're experiencing. So we can take them out of the situation when they're ready, and we can put them into safe housing. But if there are substance abuse issues, if there's deeply rooted trauma, mental health issues, they're not going to be able to conform to the rules of safe housing, because you can't use substances in safe housing or transitional housing. So when we don't have kind of services in place within the community to address all of those other issues and what end up being barriers to people who seek safety, but then leave that safe situation and go back to their relationship or go back to the situation where they're being trafficked. And that's true for our youth who have a home, right? So they live at home with their family, but they run away, and they run away for different reasons, and that's when they're at risk, or that's when they're being exploited. And so we have kids that are coming in and out of our Safe Harbor program that are at home for a week or a month, and then they run and they're back out in the community and they're being trafficked, and then they're back home for a bit. But we don't have the ability to kind of wrap them in the services that they need long time, and to figure out ways to address whatever need is being met via the relationship or the trafficking that becomes a major barrier.
So that was not an accidental alarm. You're going to hear that when we're ready for our next session. To transition, what I'm hearing is we need to spotlight existing services that exist, not just for trafficking, but domestic violence and youth, and our foster family system and the shortfalls there that can help create less of an issue for trafficking, because those organizations and those services are being supported the way that they need to. Everybody, please, I mean this, send us written stuff, specifics, things you think of tomorrow. We have a ton of information. We have an awesome team, awesome number of staff members in the assembly right now that are focused on putting a nice report together. It will not be ignored. We want to hear from you, and others who are not in this room that you think might provide some feedback, and survivors. Please, please, please talk to survivors that are willing to talk to us, that we would like to feature, because they're going to be the best people to deliver this message when it comes to legislative remedies and funding remedies. Any other final comments before we transition to our next topic?
I got a dumb question.
Thanks for joining me.
I was a prosecutor for 14 years, and I dealt with a lot of domestic violence cases, and it would be somebody come in, got the crap beat out of them, and then they want to go back to where they were. And I had a lot of latitude because I just did. And I always have to talk about, like, okay, you're going to drop the charges. But I said, it's not your decision anymore, it's my decision, and I don't want to see it going back, because you got 3 kids and you're going to be sitting at a bus station, no place to go, nobody take care of your kids, and you can't, and I just used a lot of things that probably were beyond the realm. But the big question I have for all the social service providers and all of you who take people in, what is the first intake step? I mean, this is for law enforcement. How do people come into the system? Is it through charges? Is it through, what law enforcement? How do you get these people into your system? Is it because there's an incident, police, arrest, some explosion in the house? How do they come in? And then I'm listening to hotels now. When you put somebody in a hotel, you get a room and a bed and a phone, and I knew from people who worked at kids escaping drugs, kids that I represented in court for drug addiction, heroin, and all that stuff, that they said, well, you just walk out the door and you get your stuff over there. And I had somebody, I worked through a program, got them in city court, they no sooner got out, I got them clean straight, and the dope dealer handed them a sample as soon as they got out. They were at city court, the parking ramp. So how do they get into the system? Because when you put somebody in a hotel, right, what do you got? You got a room and bed. What about food? And who does the first assessment? Because I always thought the assessment thing is critical, because you got kids. What about the medical situation? What if you got a kid with diabetes? Who does the profiling from the onset to, because the emotional stuff is just an explosion. But even just the fundamental needs. What about food? What about immediate needs? What about medication? What about contacts? How do you get the medication, in for a kid that's going to come into your system? How does that happen? I mean, what's the first step? How do these people come in? That's a question, I think, that's step one.
That's a complex.
I didn't
say
all of the above.
They could come in through our law enforcement partners. They could come directly into the Department of Social Services for either temporary assistance or homeless services. They could make contact with any of our community partners, who then make a phone call to try to get them in a door. There's a million ways that there's so many doors to the services.
Schools,
so
private counselors.
Yes, private counselors are mandated reporters. Schools.
Other clients. We have clients that just walk into our center with their friends and say, like, hey, this is going on. What do we do?
Right.
And we call a doctor or whatever.
But I think in the rural areas, like I'm thinking Wyoming County, we don't have the service providers, out there. So we're really getting them from law enforcement. Law enforcement is calling me up at 11 o'clock at night and saying, I don't know what to do with this. What do you do? And I'm swooping in and just getting hotels.
On the other side of our operations, we run the holding center downtown, and when someone gets remanded, quite often we're seeing that this is the first time they've ever seen a medical doctor in a decade.
Yep.
And, you know, unfortunately, about half of our population are on psychotropic medications due to underlying mental illness and many other issues. So, you know, those are the big drivers. But, you know, these investigations are interesting because they don't always end in handcuffs. Sometimes our guys are trying to investigate just to identify folks that are vulnerable so they can make these referrals to get people, you know, off that pathway to disaster, really. So,
I know in the past 4 years that I've been in the Assembly, one of the committees I sit on is corporations. We've passed a lot of laws to add signage in airports, train stations, bus terminals about, you know, it's on the mirrors. Is that working?
They don't identify it.
I see them everywhere.
I mean, but it's working.
They're there.
I see it.
They're there.
I stay in a hotel every time I'm in Albany, and I see it in the hotel. But are people
I don't know if they're
utilizing?
self-identifying themselves, but I think it's working for some people.
Okay.
Okay, so we do have correlation in numbers to hotlines, to things that are working. We are trying to really dive into that data. We do have to transition to the next topic, but please continue to follow up on the first and all these talking points with any information you think is valuable for us. Okay? Okay. Number 2, what coordination and tools do law enforcement and prosecutors need to better combat traffickers and help victims? Why don't we have our law enforcement partners kick us off? But really, I feel like everyone, again, can contribute a whole lot to this subject too.
I think one thing, and kind of piggyback on everything that was said already, there doesn't seem to be any consistent system in place. It's different, you know, like I said, 8 counties here in Troop A. I worked in Troop B, which is another 6 counties. Every county does it slightly different, and depending on which agency even takes the complaint, you know, the initial call or whatever it is, depends on how it's going to be handled and who's going to be contacted next, whether they go to a CAC, whether they go to social services, you know, whether or not the victim wants to cooperate, who the suspect is, whether it's a parent, whether it's, you know, an uncle, whether it's just a complete stranger. You know, we're having a new level of trafficking right now, which we're seeing quite often with these internet crimes against children.
Yeah.
Where the trafficking is being done, you know, digitally.
Absolutely.
You know, the parents or the guardian, whoever it is recording. We're working on one this morning right now, where a poor little 8-year-old girl, you know, her own parent is the one that's putting her images out there and sending them to these people.
Yep.
So each one of these is very different. Each agency handles them slightly differently, and each, you know, geographic area handles it differently. There is no blanket policy in mind that ever works. You know, and each one does have to be investigated in a different manner with different partnerships. But I think there's always room for training. Just identifying the problem sometimes is tough enough, because oftentimes we know these victims don't want to come forward. They either don't realize or they don't want to realize that they are in a position where, you know, terrible things are occurring to them.
You are starting to see some tech companies, I think Instagram's the first one to be doing this moving forward, where there's going to be some provisions put in place for individuals under the certain age. Obviously, this is not perfect, but it's a starting point of them acknowledging that they have the ability and responsibility to do something to mitigate some of this. We had a mother that spoke in Albany at another event. Her 13-year-old son was being sent conversations by somebody from another country and got him to send an image of himself to this person who was going to exploit him, asked him for $10,000 or they're going to put it all over online. And this 13-year-old went to soccer practice, never came home, killed himself. And this happens all over the country. So I'm glad you brought up exploitation. It's on our radar, but we definitely need to hear more about what we can do for you, some of the issues that you're running into. At the state level, we've done, I don't say we, but there's been some action moving towards some of our social media companies. It gets mixed support, and that's at least a starting point. But that's a really good, you know, thing for us to highlight as well. Exploitation. When it comes to the issue in its entirety and current state laws, what are some hindrances that law enforcement faces on this particular issue?
Just a thought. I could tell you, you know, in law enforcement, you know, this human trafficking, like when I was starting my career, and I think we're all 20-plus year veterans, it wasn't something that was on the radar. It was something that happened elsewhere outside of this country. But if you took the trip down to Broadway and Bailey right now, you'd probably see quite a bit of it. It's prevalent. And the police, bail reform was implemented probably for altruistic or good reasons, but they moved the goalposts a lot on us, and used to be able to take people and bring them in and put them in jail overnight or until they saw a judge, and now it's an appearance ticket, and so you don't have the means to intervene on these things substantially. I mean, they're back doing what they were doing before you know with your paperwork. So.
The problem becomes, without the specialty courts and without keeping them behind bars for at least for a night, and then going to arraignment and having somebody do an ACD, a judge doing an ACD, and sending, we'll use drugs as an example, sending you into recovery and then rehab, you don't have that advantage anymore. And the criminal justice system doesn't work like your system does, the human services system. That system works where you've committed a wrong, and now you're in the system. We used to tell youth this all the time. Don't come in, because once you're in, we have to take you all the way through the other side with adjudication. You don't have that option. The second part you don't have is what he's talking about. If you don't ask for help or don't want help, what do you do next? What do they do? So you give them an appearance ticket. They don't show up anyways. And the next thing you know, so although maybe, the cashless bail was something done with altruistic things in mind, it didn't work the way they wanted it to work. And so we have to fix that. One of the things we learn in the Assembly is what we call the Bill of Unintended Consequences. No matter what we do, when we help some person, we hurt another. And that's always going to be the case. What you guys do is save a lot of lives. But without a system that works like that one, that gets them in here and takes them out there, and they walk away, you're starting over at the beginning. The other part is, they're depending on these people that traffic them for their existence. And once you guys let them go, they really don't know what else to do. So we go back to the same thing we do with domestic violence, and telling the partner don't go back, and then they go back and the kids do it. Those are the things that are going to continue to happen. The trafficking thing is very, very difficult because, one, a lot of times they don't even know themselves they're being trafficked. So the problem becomes, how do you treat them? And you guys do a great job. Child Advocacy Center, for one, where I live, is awesome. And we tried to put a family justice center with them so that they could take care of all those issues. But there's never going to be one stop. Never going to be one stop, no matter how hard you guys try. There's never going to be one stop. And I don't know, quite frankly, and I've been at this for a long time, how to get there. I'm not saying I have any idea, So the bottom line is, I don't know what to do next, but they can only do, as I point to law enforcement.
Actually, share this with the Assemblyman. I've made countless calls to parents, right, to say, hey, your daughter or son was arrested for being a prostitute or for possession of narcotics, or you name it, and they were absolutely elated that they were in jail, and they knew at least they weren't going to get that night. And these things don't always end well, and that wasn't the perfect solution more often than not, but at least it gave the family some hope that maybe they'd get another crack at getting them on the right track.
We did the same thing with opioids. When we kept them and got them moving forward, and we took them into recovery and then rehab, that gave them enough time to be out of the neighborhood, if you will, where they were committing their whatever, and trying to find a way out. Because I'm sure with human trafficking it'll be the same. Nobody wants to be there. It's just finding the way, finding the light at the end of the tunnel.
When you say bail reform, just for our note and for the folks that are putting together the recommendations, are you speaking to judicial discretion, or what aspects of bail reform? Because there was obviously a lot there.
Yeah, so everything's an appearance ticket now. The qualifying offenses are, just the extreme felonies. Everything else is an appearance ticket,
So perhaps something to amend the law that speaks to victims of domestic violence, victims of trafficking, that puts them in a place where it can eventually lead to expungement, something like that.
I mean, that would be a start. I think the genesis of this was, and I'm not 100% sure, but it was some guy who got stuck in Rikers Island for a year on a crack stem violation, and no one wants to see that happen either.
It was actually multiple years, and there were a lot of breakdowns in the system on it, Bill, but the problem became the poster boy for everything that might be wrong with the criminal justice system, and people with a good heart saw that and they said, well, we have to change. But the bottom line is, again, how much do you change? What do you change? As Brian just said, what are the things? You know, in New York, we don't consider dangerousness, the only state in the union.
Yeah.
It does not consider dangerousness.
I agree, and I don't think there is a coalition meeting in Erie County that includes our law enforcement and the DA's office where bail reform doesn't come up because of that, because it has had a chilling effect on the time we have to try to create a connection with a victim, whether that's trafficking or DV, while that person is in custody. Even if it's just for a day or two, it gives us that opportunity. If that victim knows that that person is not going to be held and is going to be out, you have no opportunity to try to build the relationship to get them in a place where they're going to trust you, that we can come up with a safety plan to keep them safe when they do get out. And our DA is saying most of the time the referrals that are coming in for DV is because the charges have come in on something else, and we're realizing that there's a DV component because the victim's not going to come forward because they're not coming to our DV advocates because there's no time for us to try to build that relationship.
You guys take the fear factor out of it when they're in your system. The minute they get out of your system, the fear factor comes right back. And that's, with criminal justice, that's part of the problem. How do we address that? We don't know. We talked about secure housing. Because if they know where you are, the other sheriff talked about his wife and having students come down from Hamburg down to a city district. Well, their parents or whomever's trafficking them knows they're going to go to that school. So how do you know somebody's not waiting outside for them there? So how do you close the system? How do you keep them protected until the light at the end of the tunnel? That's part of the reasons we're here, trying to get to that point, to understand that although once we identify them, which is one of the more difficult parts, once we identify them, how do we help them get out the other side and become productive and away from all the fears that they have up until that point?
Just a crazy, just a crazy thought. I mean, you can't take a driver's license test without a 5-hour course. You can't leave a hospital with a newborn without watching a shaken baby video. If we think we have somebody, if we think we have somebody in our custody, whether they're under arrest or whether they're believed to be a victim or they're reporting to be a victim, there's got to be some way on the law enforcement. We can't force them to do anything they don't want to do. Is there, when we started the domestic violence programs and crime victim advocates in the early 2000s or late 90s, whatever it was, we came up with pamphlets that were provided. We came up with the DIR, and they were mandated to sign that they received the victim copy of the DIR. All these different steps. We have none of that for this type of
That's really interesting.
problem.
It's really good.
A set of pamphlets that we have, a 5-minute video that we sit down and watch with them while they're at the barracks or in our car, whatever the case may be. These things are out there. These are options. We can tell them, but maybe seeing it and having it, and oftentimes the domestic ones would walk out and they're on the ground. They know that if they bring that home, that they're in more trouble. But maybe it's a starting point. Maybe it's
While they're in your custody, you have to watch this video or else ...
or take the pamphlet or read something.
Well, like you said, the pamphlet may not work, but the video, like the shaking, but even for defensive driving, seeing like when you're sleeping, you watch that video. That's a lot. I really like that idea.
I don't know that
It might not work all the time, but it's
something.
exposing more people to education.
We're at what was the number, 672?
And have an advocate
on the hotline, maybe we
video.
get up to 800. I don't know.
So one of the, and if this got brought up when I said that, I apologize. I know one of the things that our CAC of Monroe County, Bavona Child Advocacy Center, is doing more of is going into schools to kind of talk about, this is what abuse is. And that actually, in where I went to school, my elementary school, they actually found that, the principal was doing this to students, and it was because Bavona went in and talked to these elementary school students about this is what is inappropriate, this is what is illegal, and then kids came forward after the fact. Is there anything that you already have, CACs maybe have different levels of investment, different levels of cooperation with DA's office, law enforcement, other stakeholders in the sector, but is there room to have sort of the CACs come in, and when they go in and they talk to students about sex abuse, talking about, this is what trafficking is?
So I can speak to that a little bit. because we do that now. So number one, I think to preface that, the reason that's happening is because New York State passed a law mandating it to happen. So when Aaron's Law was passed mandating that schools from grade K through 8 either provide the prevention education themselves or allow for agencies to come in and provide that education. So when Aaron's Law passed, that really kick-started. We were in schools before then, but we would kind of coordinate in our county with the YWCA. We would kind of use our inside connections, like whose wife is a school social worker, whose husband works here, that we can, use that as an in.
It was not in our school, that's not happening.
Right, similar to trafficking. So through Aaron's Law, we go in and we have added to our sexual abuse prevention. We talk about online safety, and we talk about human trafficking, commercial sexual exploitation. The problem with that is the same problem we have with everything else, is that New York State passed a law mandating this, but there's no funding attached to it. So we go in and we do that, and we do it to the best of our ability, but what that's done is taken away from our ability to provide other services. So for our teen programming, we've incorporated that into our Safe Harbor program, but our Safe Harbor funding got cut through OCFS to $35,000 a year, which is not even a salary. So we've had to reduce our intensive case management caseload. So if we want to continue to do the school-based prevention education, we now can only see 5 kids for intensive case management services. So.
And even though we get 40 minutes to talk about dating violence, sexual assault, and trafficking. So we oftentimes try to divide and conquer in Niagara County. And I had some of my slides to your presentation, you had some of yours to mine, but it's not enough time to really spend with the kiddos and have those thorough conversations.
Would you guys be able to look into grants to get like a prevention educator included in
We
your
had a
plan?
grant
We
with
have a prevention educator.
we have a prevention, but
also,
it's never enough money.
In Chautauqua County, like, we need more money too.
Oh, yes, money.
It's a job added on to multiple other jobs.
The education is also talking about, we're providing education to the professionals in the schools, but we're also utilizing the Love 146, Not a Number program, which is an evidence-supported curriculum for youth. And we've partnered with several school social workers and teachers to get them trained in the Love 146 curriculum so they can do it in the schools, and we act as our CAC as kind of like a database or a resource center for the teachers and the social workers in the school who we've educated to provide that education right in their schools. And we've created memorandums of understanding with several of our school districts to do those trainings, educate their professionals and staff, and to be able to refer back and forth for our programs in a way that's confidential, but also linking folks.
So does Aaron's Law, does it prescribe what has to be discussed, or does it leave it up to
I'm confused by Aaron's Law, to be honest, because the way
Real
it's
quick,
written.
I do want to apologize. We are going to hit on the education in schools and all that on 4, and I just want to finish one more question to law enforcement.
Sorry, guys.
I love it. This is my job, right? This is my job. Okay.
I think some training for law enforcement too.
That's perfect, yeah.
I reach out a lot of times to chief of police. Shelley and I spend a lot of time at the police academy, but even then it's one day for people who are taking in a ton of information about every single aspect of their job. I have a lot of people that we talk to that don't think that they'll ever deal with sex cases, or they'll just be on the road. And so I don't know that it's necessarily recognized how important it is to know that information and get that training, but oftentimes I have to give them like 10 minutes in between their shift change. So it's just not enough time spent with people.
I would let law enforcement answer that. I know that going around the state, depending on where you are, some law enforcement agencies have gotten really good at getting themselves trained, whether it's nonprofits like yourselves coming in and doing the training or other training. I'll let you guys speak to that. Actually, go ahead. Why don't you do that? Because I do want to hit on raise the age, and we have like 4 minutes. But go ahead.
So just with respect to training, our guys on the Human Trafficking Task Force are now going out to the academies and giving blocks of instruction. And they're also going to new investigator school and giving instruction, and to supervisor school to give them more instruction on this topic. We're also putting out literature to NGOs and schools, and these things, this literature is not just something we dreamt up. It gets approved by the DOJ because some of our personnel were subsidized by the DOJ. So we're being proactive in that realm. Full disclosure, I haven't really seen the literature that's going out, but I know it's been vetted. So.
In terms of law enforcement training too, and just to add, in addition to, I think, recognizing human trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation, kind of the important piece of helping, especially patrol officers, understand how to respond to victims, because a lot of times when we have a victim or a survivor that's presenting to law enforcement first, that interaction that they have with the officers sometimes is what makes them decide to move forward or prevents them from
You're talking
moving
about
forward.
local police, like town,
talking
village
about,
departments,
yes.
because they're the
Yes.
first line on a lot of
Yes.
these.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
City,
will-
state.
I 100% agree with Shelley on that.
They don't
'cause
trust
we've
law
had
enforcement.
clients that if it's addressed a certain way, we've lost our door,
Sure.
because we're
Right from the get-go.
affiliated, and
local
that's
police
it.
training.
Yeah,
And I
trauma-informed
think-
care,
I
for
think
sure.
TIC for sure, and I think even just like, I hear things like, well, they're just a prostitute, they committed a crime anyway. So then my answer is, was there force, fraud, or coercion? Because the TVPA says if there's force, fraud, or coercion, they're not a prostitute, they are victims of human trafficking. So I think that's a piece where there's maybe some blurred lines in how we're talking.
They don't have to meet that criteria with minors, right?
18 and under, yeah.
Yeah, there doesn't need to be.
So I know Brian's alarm went off, but I'll break the rules because I have seniority over him. And I'm going to say this with respect, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for prosecutors and the role that our DAs play. But you also see stats that we see about 90% of all cases are pled out.
Yep.
Are we seeing that same rate of pleas being done in trafficking cases where, defendants may be taking pleas that maybe don't truly identify the type of trafficking they were involved in, that therefore keeps them off the radar of, okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
The
yes,
answer
yes,
is
and
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But as somebody who is from a district attorney's office too, and on that first call from these guys, like, you have to understand, when a victim immediately reports, it's just a small piece that they're reporting, and it's almost always only misdemeanor crimes.
Yeah.
So our hands are tied as to what we can do, because the max we're looking at is 1 year, depending on their criminal history and factors like that. And that victim is not gonna stand up there in trial
So
against their accuser to testify.
We have hit on this across the state, and when we have DAs present, they do a good job explaining to us that a lot of the crimes are also federally prosecuted, and that the state laws haven't caught up to the penalties, and also you put in bail reform, raise age, and all that stuff into it, because then they try to get younger people to do what they're, shouldn't be doing.
The labor trafficking, right?
The labor trafficking is a big piece as well. But the state, and this is where we're getting a lot of recommendations, and we'd like your opinions, all of you, on raising levels of penalties and creating more in the penal law, like we did in 2007 to establish trafficking in the first place in New York State. We need to do that more and beef it up more, because it's why it exists. It is easier to traffic in people than it is in drugs, because there's less of
So
penalty
I
involved.
know that sometimes in drug trafficking, there's often conspiracy charges that come
Yeah,
down.
that's true.
Would it make sense to amend the penal law to add into conspiracy to traffic in people?
Yes.
And then that, that gives another avenue to get a state level conviction, just like we would when we go after drug traffickers.
We also don't have, in terms of New York State penal code, this is my pitch, I guess, for Noah's Law. So we have strong, when we're talking about children, we have really strong charges, felony level, A2 felony level charges. Thinking about like sexual assault, predatory sexual assault, production, pornography. The prosecution and the pleas, I think, is a whole other issue in terms of how long it takes, especially with discovery law, to be able to charge someone. But we don't have a New York State felony level, just child abuse charges
Yeah.
in general that could encompass
It's crazy.
trafficking or elements of trafficking as well. So essentially, right now, we've had a case in Erie County, we've had a case in Niagara County. You can put a child in a cage for a week and not feed that child, and you would receive a lesser charge than if you sold a counterfeit Josh Allen jersey outside of a Bills game. It's the laws in terms of just child abuse in general, torture and physical abuse, there's a huge discrepancy. But we do have a bill that's introduced in the Assembly, Noah's Law, in the Senate, that hopefully will remedy that, but.
Do you know who the sponsor of that is?
For the Assembly? Angela Morinello, Mike Norris, and Bill Conrad just signed on.
Great. We'll be including that.
Thank you.
Number 3.
Yes, we are ready to go to number 3, and unfortunately, I will have to have some written feedback on Raise the Age, because obviously that has a huge impact, and we want to include that in our report. And as much as law enforcement gives us really good feedback on how that impacts them, we really would appreciate the nonprofits, you guys talking to us about how maybe some well-intended folks in Albany passed a law that is hurting the people they're trying to help. Okay.
That's what we heard yesterday too about the green light law.
We did with
from the
green light.
border.
Yeah.
That's another one.
But we'd love to hear from you guys if you can email us your thoughts on Raise the Age and also law enforcement on how we can tweak. Obviously, we want to be realistic, but we want to put some good recommendations in there.
Just real quick, on Raise the Age.
Yes.
I hope everybody's aware that there's a loophole in there based on ages, where comes a time, if you commit a crime at 17 and turn 18, there's not a court in the state that can prosecute you.
Send us that, all right, Captain?
Right, because with Raise the Age, they switched it to family court.
Correct. And
Family
family
court is
court
not a
can't
criminal
take
justice
anything once
court.
you're 18.
It's not a criminal court,
So you
therefore.
can't go there and you can't go to Raise the Age and you can't go to criminal because you committed it at juvenile level.
Shoot us an email, we'll send that to the staff to make sure we highlight.
As
Okay.
well as the 12 and under appearance tickets, that we cannot force a family to take services to try to mitigate and reduce, the recidivism of those crimes becoming more severe or ongoing.
That's what I was going to say. I just wanted to add, there is an evidence-based intervention for youth who commit sexually on other youth. I'm credentialed to provide problematic sexual behavior, cognitive behavior therapy, so that's a huge thing that we're seeing is now.
It's voluntary.
It's voluntary, so.
So if you don't think it's a problem.
If you don't think it's a
do it.
problem, then your kid doesn't get signed up for it.
And that's why when they pushed Raise the Floor,
Yes.
that was such a big debate in our
Right,
conference on that.
huge, because that program is
Because
such
just
a
that
low
exact reason.
recidivism, right? It's so successful, but we need to have the kid and their
Right.
parent engaged.
Right.
So Captain, I know in the 7th Judicial District, there is a Supreme Court judge. They've created and I forget the name of it, I was just talking to the judge who oversees it, but it's essentially a family Supreme Court unit, where when it's something that would end up with felony charges, but it also is something that would have jurisdiction in family court, they can be accelerated from family court and take the family court aspect out and move it into the Supreme Court so that one judge can hear all components of the case. If that was something that every judicial district had, would that fix the loophole? Because then it could be, if there's felonious charges that were committed by a 17-year-old, that could be accelerated into a Supreme Court setting if there's other family-related criminality.
I think it probably could, not seeing it, not
Yeah,
being
yeah,
able
yeah.
to read it, but I think, that's part of the youth part. If they're
Yeah.
underage and the DA wants to keep it in criminal court, they file the motions, and the judge makes his decision. I assume it would be something along those same lines, because at 17, it still would have to start in the youth part.
Right.
But the problem comes in when the crime is committed at 17. They don't get caught, we don't figure it out until they're 18, 19, 20.
Yep.
There's now nowhere to take them.
And
Okay.
just to add on to that, in fact, Lynette Rita, who's not really the XR name thing, but I actually was on a Zoom link when this came out, when this loophole was figured out by, actually, the District Attorneys Association in New York, DASNY, has had a lot of conversation on this loophole with that Raise the Age, and that's kind of how this forum that we were on a couple years ago started. But I know that the DAs, the 62 DAs, are well aware of this. I think at the end of the day, I think it is going to take some legislation to fix that. But what it really hurts is it's not so much the drug and the gun statutes, but I've had cases, and we've had cases where you have 130 crimes. You have sex crimes where the crime was committed at 17, at that felony level, and now we're at a loss. What we can do with that case with prosecution.
And then they've received no rehabilitation or
Yeah.
All right. Heard.
Could I just mention
Yes.
the Proposition 1 on the ballot?
Sure. Let's get into it.
Just the language, I mean, you're talking about raise the age at 17. There's language in Proposition 1 that specifically calls out ageism, which...
I don't even, I don't know how we even...
Okay.
We'd blow right through his next alarm.
It's such a huge issue. What does
Yeah.
that even mean? Which is the point, right?
Right, and so I've kind of picked up some, paraphernalia in Allentown where there, weed packages on the back says, well, unless, 21 and over, unless someone is a qualified patient, and this is like, a package with, weed gummies on it.
Sure.
And so this is gonna be not only that, and then there's also, flyers for, we never use a loan, types of things. So you're handing out medical, quasi-medical, luring things for trafficking, to potentially children.
Unfortunately, we debated for the last, I was one of those years, for a few years, the Prop 1, and a lot of the reasons you just talked about, we brought up, and it's a little scary, some of the stuff that could happen from Prop 1. I think we should probably move on to the next talking point.
Can I just say one thing?
Yes, ma'am.
And this is a buzzword nobody's picking up on Prop 1. And, we're actually, some people I'm working with, we're considering issues the way the Prop 1 is put on the ballot, because, it's an amendment to the Constitution, and they're summarizing some of the effects. It's not the bill. That to me is a very fraudulent presentation. But the big word that everybody has to be aware of is autonomy. That autonomy word opens the door to kids having complete control. I mean, no parental guidance. That's a scary word in there, and that's the buzzword people aren't paying any attention to, because everything else is this, that, and the other thing. Pay attention to the autonomy.
We will have a sidebar after this for anyone who wants to take part in Prop 1 discussion. All right, moving on to Group 3. Well, it's not Group 3, Topic 3. What impact is the migrant crisis having on human trafficking crimes within the state? And I know, Natalie, you work in this space. I know that we heard yesterday from U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, Division of Homeland Security, kind of the numbers that are coming in. I know there was a comment made already about you can't provide services unless you have some sort of legal status, but some of these migrants do get some type of piece of paper that allows them to receive some services. So with the years of wait, 1 to 2 years we heard in Buffalo and 5 years in other places, what is happening here?
Well, with the increased new arrivals coming in, I'm seeing in particular, an increase in men who are being labor trafficked in construction, agriculture, things like that. And we have very little resources in the area to support men who are survivors of labor trafficking. And it's difficult it's really a case-by-case thing. There are several different ways to get a legal status, or even just a temporary legal status, but like I said, it depends on the case. And it depends on where the person's country of origin is. Like for temporary protective status, for instance, that's a temporary legal status that comes with a work permit, and it's only for foreign-born nationals who are from specific countries, who have been in the United States since a certain date. And it only is for certain countries. There's also T visas, trafficking visas, and right now, the processing times are estimated at 17 months, and that's a low. It's much more than that.
Is that because of the lack of judge? What are the reasons why the wait is so long?
There is an increase in applicants, which is partly a good thing, because there are outlets for people to, foreign-born survivors to report and apply, because it is really underreported. But T visas are processed through the Vermont Service Center at USCIS Immigration. And that's just one facility. So they're, I don't work there, but that's just one facility. So they can only process so many. And they're all very complex cases. And with new T visa rules that came out.
Federal or?
Yeah, immigration regulations. There is a bona fide determination where someone can get a temporary deferred action and a work permit. However, we are unclear as to when that's going to happen. But in that time, especially if someone is in New York State but not trafficked in New York State, it's very difficult to get any kind of benefits unless it's emergency Medicaid.
So when we're talking about those being the migrant population being trafficked, especially the labor, or I guess all trafficking, is it predominantly people who are indebted to whoever helped them cross into the country, or is it people who are taking advantage once they're here and they have no legal means to make money?
It's both, but I am seeing with the increase in new arrivals, it's usually non-citizens being recruited or
once they're here.
Once they're here. There was a client who was that I have that was just asked, he was approached by someone at a gas station and offered a job. And that client was going to take it because they need a job. And then, their employer took their documents, and then it kind of, snowballs from there, where then they cannot leave that job.
Natalie, you're a volunteer, and you also have to work and live, right? So
yeah, I'm not a volunteer.
You're not a volunteer.
Yeah, I'm employed there.
You're employed there, okay? Because I saw the volunteer, and I had no idea how this worked. Okay, so you're a lawyer for a nonprofit. Obviously, you need more of you, and it's tough because if you're an attorney, you can make more money privately than, say, working for a nonprofit. Have you been able to take advantage of some of the loan forgiveness programs? Is that something that is an incentive we could grow to bring more people into your field, to help provide services, to help with some of this lag time and obviously the load that you have? And what is that? What is your load?
There is a public service forgiveness program that is something that I'm also enrolled in after 10 years of service. And then
There's something else specific for immigration attorneys though as well, right?
Where
some of that is subsidized?
For attorneys, yes,
Okay.
and I believe that's after a certain amount of years.
3 years.
Yeah, 3 years. Yeah, so those are two things. It at least with the public service loan forgiveness program, that one, well, it just seems it's difficult depending on where it is in the court system, if it's state or not. But my caseload right now can vary between 50 to 85 plus cases. It really just, it fluctuates. But what's difficult is that because of processing times with immigration are becoming longer and longer. For example, an applicant for a U visa, which is a visa for crime victims, and it can include trafficking, domestic violence, a certain number of things. Right now, with the processing, we're estimating it's around 10, 15 years to get.
That's it.
And
No big deal.
And there's,
Just a little
and there's
paperwork.
fees
Just
that
a
often are
generation.
not covered, even if you have a volunteer attorney or someone doing it pro bono, there's additional fees that most of the time the new citizen or, someone trying to become and go through all the legal, they really can't afford that. And so sometimes they get stuck in these labor trafficking or underemployed situations just more as a means of survival. We have youth in foster care who, we don't have pay lines to help them become citizens, and they ended up in our system because something happened to them with the caretaker or parent, whoever brought them to our country. And then we have to find ways, we've had community foundations to help us pay those fees and things like that, but the fees are huge as they move forward. Yeah.
So in this year's budget, there's $2.4 billion that was sent to New York City to cover costs. Are any of those state dollars being used to help pay the fees to process some of the things that you talked about, or is it only being used by New York City to reimburse counties for cost of living?
I'm not aware of there being
Any
money
funding
set aside.
to you guys?
We've looked all over kind of trying to help. I mean, we have a handful of foster care youth that are, on the older end of foster care youth, somewhere between 16 and 20 years old, that we're trying to make citizens, to make them whole before they age out of our system. But I'm not aware of, we've made 1 million phone calls and emails, and I wasn't aware of that. But that is not atypical for any funding, right? Like, the majority of funding ends up going downstate to
Or even
New
just
York.
support, yeah.
Yeah,
Training.
no,
Support.
and that
Every
might-
conference I go
And then
to.
people say they look at Erie County and think like, oh, well, you guys are the biggest outside of New York, why aren't you doing that? And I'm like, well, we don't have funding
and
for
that mon-
that, or we don't,
That budget line item went wholly
Yeah.
to New York City for New York City to reimburse the costs. In Rochester, I think there was 80 some odd migrants who were bussed up.
Okay.
And then out of that money went to the county to reimburse them for.
Follows them up.
It follows them. But the point, the reason I asked about
Yeah.
some of the fees that are attached that you mentioned.
Right.
I didn't know if Erie County, Monroe County, Onondaga was getting any of that to help pay fees to process the migrants once they're.
I don't think any of us are aware of it.
Okay.
If we are able to have access to it, we're not aware of it.
Why don't you generate an email to send to us that we can raise the question, just in case procedurally and administratively there is even any chance
If there's a
that there could be a reimbursement
Right.
for this purpose as well? Probably not, but it can't hurt to try, right?
Sure.
I think the other issue too we're discovering is language services. Because to her point, we are also getting an increased referrals of people that are foreign born. And so we're spending money the past 6 months that we normally didn't budget for language line or interpretation services so that we can best serve those individuals to know what their needs are. So I would say that's a huge funding need, at least from where we're sitting. We've already put a bit of money into it.
Now, for that, much like hospitals can do, you could contract virtually in certain
So we use
situations.
language line, or we contract with providers in the community that provide that
Okay, that's
service,
good.
but it's just not something we originally had accounted for.
That's good.
But now with the increase, to Natalie's point, it's becoming a greater need.
Well, what I would imagine too, if it's a circumstance for sex trafficking, you may be able to get a Spanish interpreter on a quick turn, but a French interpreter is probably, a Portuguese interpreter, a African language that may not be, right. it
One of the
may-
many dialects.
Labor trafficking, you may get.
Hard to
'cause you-
find, there's like one interpreter in the entire United States
Yeah, we've
for
had to
certain
call,
languages.
yes.
We worked with people in
I
like
think New York
universities in
State
California
requires that we
and.
have access to the top 13
Yeah.
languages.
Right.
Well, but what I'm.
What they're saying is, what we're seeing,
Yeah.
and I can tell you, like, our,
Not the top
we
three.
have a team,
Mhm.
we have a CPS team dedicated to just refugee and new American cases.
Wow.
Because, so that they are more well-versed in how to access those very specific and very unique languages so that we can assess the family appropriately.
Yeah. Like I know in Monroe County, we have a
More
very.
than the 13.
Well, in Monroe County, we have a strangely, a very high population of Tibetan refugees. And certainly, I wouldn't imagine that the language they speak is in the top 13 of the state, but you almost have to get somebody from that community who speaks the language. And to your point about, okay, labor trafficking, you may have an enforcement mechanism during the day when they're on a job site working. But for sex trafficking, it may be something that comes in at 1 o'clock in the morning, and it may be difficult to get a community-based interpreter, or even one of those hotlines. I've never had to get a
The
translation
hotline
hotline.
is available,
Right.
but
It's difficult
I
after 5
actually have
p.m.
staff come to me, and I think there's like, I don't know, 130, 150 language options on Language Line that said that the language this particular referral had was not even in Language Line.
Right.
And then those
Right.
referrals sometimes have their own illiteracy in their language.
Yes.
So then that's like a double
Right.
layer.
And
of
I have
things.
That's true.
had my own, we have Spanish-speaking caseworkers who have sat when so if they're discussing a legal matter or a safety plan for children, the Spanish-speaking workers might want the language line to be explaining that so that there's not a perception of
That's right.
us giving
Gotcha.
inaccurate information. But I've had my own Spanish-speaking workers say that the language line doesn't seem to understand what we're trying to explain, that if you do not engage in the safety plan, these children will end up in foster care. And the language line is like, no, just try your best, you know, like, and they're, you know, they don't know that it's a Spanish-speaking worker there.
Got it.
So we're also like very careful about how we use language line and making sure that it's the appropriate dialect, and then we don't know.
Yeah.
Because we don't, you know,
Get
we
it, so
often
we
don't
don't
have
know.
someone in those languages, so.
Another sphere of this is within our school districts. We have had school district representatives at roundtables in the past. You're seeing English as a second language, TESOL. School districts are having to hire more teachers to handle the new students that are coming in that need these services. And one of the devices that some of these school districts have is that kind of device where you can kind of speak into it and it kind of comes back. Yeah, it's translating, right, yeah.
Google Translate would probably work better
I
than
mean, it's a
Google
combi,
sometimes.
it's like that, right? So it's a device where the student can speak and you can speak in English as a teacher, because not all our TESOL teachers speak multiple languages. And, but that's another funding issue as well that we're gonna include in the report. But this is important to hear that the nonprofits have this issue as well. Okay. Anything else?
We beat the buzzer.
We did beat the buzzer.
It's a miracle.
All
I
right.
don't think I've seen that before,
Yeah.
honestly.
Okay. We're gonna move on to my favorite way to end this, because there's so much to do here and some of it is low-hanging fruit that we can do. What kinds of education and training are needed to better equip professionals and all New Yorkers to recognize someone who needs help? I think I stopped you, Sheridan, sorry?
Okay.
Is that, how does he pronounce your name?
Sheridan.
Sheridan. I don't know if you remember what you were going to say in this
So
topic.
I had asked a question about, does Aaron's Law mandate what sort of education needs to be provided either by a CAC or by a school-based?
I believe they give like recommendations of different curriculums, but the language, last I checked, which was a couple of years ago, was it should be provided by a domestic violence or sexual assault agency or some sort of agency, or by the teacher. And that being it and/or is flexible, which is great for when you don't have enough people to provide that, so the school is still providing it. But it could be a barrier when we have people who are trained and knowledgeable on that topic and that curriculum wanting to go in the schools, and we're like, hey, this angle, Aaron's Law, we can provide this, and they go, oh, no, thanks, we already got it covered. Well, I don't really know what you guys are covering.
I had a superintendent call our hotline, and he wanted us to hand over our manual that we use to them.
And just
He
have
was
them
gonna
do
have
that.
the gym teachers read it over their summer vacation, so that when school started up in September, they could do a quick 10-minute thing before they played
Learned it
kickball.
all.
Oh,
Yeah, so we offer that in the schools, because education, prevention, restoration is one of the things. And so the past 4 to 5 years, that was an initiative we pushed. So a lot of Erie County school districts we've been able to get in, and now they're repeatedly asking us back every year, so that every student in that building will hear it every year. And we speak specifically to trafficking related. So we don't get in knee deep into what is sex or labor trafficking. We get more into the preventative side. And to the Love 146, we are a partner with them as well and have that curriculum training. And I think that's brilliant that you guys are trying to establish MOUs to get the districts to learn it. I might talk to you more about that. But that's a big piece of the Aaron's Law. It does have parameters, and it does have this list, every grade level, 5 through 8, and then it goes through. But human trafficking is a one small component of that requirement. So I think having that where we have the full period to talk about that in general and to educate the faculty. We get asked to a lot of staff development, and it's been very fascinating. My husband's a teacher. And I'm fascinated by how the faculty didn't really understand the impact of devices and social media, especially post-COVID. And my husband has to remind me that we don't sit and live in what you live in, so what we don't know, we don't know. And that's fair, right? People don't know what they don't know. And so educating a community beyond schools, but beyond, is really imperative to the prevention side. And to that point, we are getting tips now that we get to pass along to the task force partners, because people are understanding more what to look for and calling. So I do think that's a big piece and something that we can continue to grow. And I also, my last big piece is that I really think further collaboration is key. There is amazing work in this room, and I don't even know half the people here, which is a disservice to all of us because there's resources and things, ideas people have that are innovative and really collaborating. I think increasing that collaboration between providers and with law enforcement and DAs and USDA is really going to benefit the work that we're trying to all accomplish collectively, and then use those funding resources to help everybody better do their work, I think is really important.
That comment's been made in every single one of our roundtables. Every one of our roundtables, someone has said, I don't know half the people in here, and I do this all day. So that's really a good point, and we should certainly mention that in our report, and just we continue having conversations like these in each of our communities. Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay, so what is Love 146, and what MOUs are we setting up in districts? Do you want to get into that?
Love 146, not a number, is an evidence-supported curriculum that is designed for ages 12 to 18 that covers topics that includes trafficking, labor trafficking, sex trafficking, digital, online safety, healthy relationships, a little bit about like red flags and warning signs. I like to include a little bit more about domestic violence in it because it does have intersections where they could be either recruited that way or are victimized by a partner. But it's, what, 5 days long?
It's 5 weeks, yeah.
Yeah,
Five, like,
five
hour-long
sessions,
sessions.
yeah. So that also is a bit of a barrier when the classrooms are all so different, at least in our county. So you have school classes that are 37 minutes, some are 48, some are 80, some are 60. So they're all so different, so trying to cram it in where you can and where people let you. And then the MOUs, I'll let you talk about.
Yeah, so we've established MOUs with a handful of the school districts in our county, but we're pushing that as kind of our goal the next couple of years to work with more of our schools. But as I said, like, I provide therapy, and I used to do what Sarah does in coordinating the trafficking stuff. So we, and both of us with our whole team at the CAC, we go into the schools a lot with trafficking and just teens and youth in general. It's, you know, really about meeting them where they're at. A lot of times the kids we work with, their parents aren't going to bring them in for services or whatnot. So we're meeting them at playgrounds, at ice cream shops, at Tim Hortons, at the schools is huge because there's so much support there. So we have been like just using closets and like side rooms to just meet with kids, and then we just established great relationships. So working with the superintendents to create those MOUs where they will, their counseling, social work, and nursing staff are trained to identify red flags of trafficking, but also child sexual abuse and problematic sexual behaviors. And they'll make those referrals to our CAC, and we can connect with that child, oftentimes including their parents, but sometimes not if they're old enough to consent for mental health treatment, and then we can meet with them on their own. So we're doing that like one-on-one individual services, but then we're also going in providing that curriculum in middle school and high schools. So, and we're working with BOCES to do their adult ed as well too, and their alternative ed.
And Job Corps.
And Job Corps. So we are, in our CAC, I think there's 4 or 5 of us that are trained in Love 146, and then we have 3 partners so far in the community that are trained. And so we're just training as many school staff as we can. The whole, like, to keep the fidelity of that curriculum, you really need to use those 5 modules, but it's such a good program for anybody that's not utilizing it. We use it all the time in our one-on-one work with kids, so the more that we can share that with our partners, we're just doing that in practice. So that's been really beneficial. We started our program in Chautauqua County in 2016, and Love 146 was our focus then, but we realized really soon after going into the schools that we were getting all these referrals, and our multidisciplinary team partners, prosecution, mental health, CPS, law enforcement, we didn't know how to deal with trafficking or exploitation. So we took a step back from that prevention education and trained our partners, our professionals, to really understand that in a trauma-informed, child-centered way. And now, for the past 2 years, we've been back in the schools and we're beefing up with that. But it's, again, comes to funding. So there's 14 of us at our organization. We're run wild. So we started in 2016, and to date, we've identified over close to 375 youth in Chautauqua County who are either confirmed victims of trafficking or at high risk. So close to 400, which is wild in a county of 120,000 people.
So for whether it's Love 146 or any of the Aaron's Law, you mentioned that you guys do in Chautauqua staff development and focusing on the public education system. Has there been any conversation about looking at childcare facilities?
Oh, absolutely. We go everywhere and anywhere. We're in Head Start, we're in nursery schools. We just work, there's the camp, for SUNY Fredonia is in our county. They have a huge education, like early childhood education center. We've been training them. We work with really the whole spectrum of folks. We go into
Teachers get
their
degrees, so like
oh yeah,
education.
teachers that are in getting their masters in education at Fredonia State, we work with them to educate them in this, and then we also work with the nursing students at JCC, at Jamestown Community College, to educate them as they go out and do their work. But we have contracts with the hospitals in our area, most of the mental health and medical facilities, and we're constantly training.
So
we're going to clone ourselves.
Yeah,
I always say I'll talk to anybody in a parking lot.
Anybody, anywhere. Like, you have your attention.
So we've got
The elevator.
okay, so certainly from what you guys, from what you said, from the heads nodding, that there is that, not just looking at the education, public education, but looking at kind of the entire ecosystem. How does that intersect with the mandated reporting standards that we already have? Like, I know for, if somebody believes that somebody's being sexually abused, there's a mandatory reporting provision that sometimes is followed, sometimes is not. Does that also apply to trafficking?
Yes.
Or is it only for, okay.
But mandated reporting only when the caregiver is responsible for that youth.
Well, you can still call the state center register and they will make the law enforcement report for you to the appropriate entity. So child protection, we only are involved when the person is in a caretaking role. However, you can call the state center register and they will register a law enforcement report to the appropriate law enforcement agency, and it will also go to the local child advocacy center.
And so, that can be the mandated reporting standard law covers trafficking
It
as well.
does. However, I think one of the biggest impediments that I've seen recently with the mandated reporting, both mandated reporting statute and the change in kind of how the training is facilitated, is that, so mandated reporting training comes through OCFS, and they just changed the training and they changed the law. Everyone has to take this new training effective, I believe, April of 2025. However, in doing that, they took away the opportunity to provide in-person mandated reporter training. So that used to be a really big push for a lot of agencies, and getting into a lot of agencies was that anyone who's considered a mandated reporter in New York State, this training is required. Some agencies would require it every year, every so many years. And so you had people across the state that were trained. I was a trainer that I could go out into agencies. I could offer the mandated reporter training, and
Kinda
everyone,
like the sexual harassment
right,
training
and
as well.
anyone that was there could check their box and get their certificate. And now with taking that opportunity away and only allowing people to take that training online, people take it, but they're not taking it. They just click through it. It's
That's
also
unfortunate.
lost the ability to add in, I think, those elements of human trafficking, of domestic violence, things that aren't
Tailoring
covered.
it to your county,
Right.
tailoring it to your population.
Which I think is where the child advocacy centers, our safe harbor coordinators, and at social services, we will go out and sort of give the training in order to give it that local piece, because it is, the OCFS training is more of a canned training to meet the needs of the entire state. And, there's certainly services that we have that Wyoming does not, or Chautauqua does, and we don't, so it's important to have that trained. I was also one of the trainers years ago, but we continue that at Erie County. Our child protective staff will go out if a request comes in to do that. And we take components of the OCFS training, but in person is always better, because, people are clicking through, and, we will say, like, who took the training, and some of them don't even remember that they took it because they took it.
Well, that's even to that point, like, for the assembly trainings that we have to do, we now have to do it in person. they don't even offer a click-through opportunity. We have to sit in, it's over Zoom, but you have to actually do it in person. So, maybe making it have to be done.
But unless you mandate something,
Right.
then
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
are going, they're gonna choose
Yeah.
the
One
easier
thing that
option.
has been successful for us with that and getting agencies to continue to do that training is with the Chautauqua County Youth Bureau. They mandate that every agency they fund with their youth development funds or their youth sports funds have to have training by the CAC yearly. So that's like 30 different agencies that have nothing to do with child welfare that we're training to.
Can I ask one question, if we're still talking about education?
Yeah.
If there was one thing that you guys could tell us to help deter, what kind of education model would you use? Because as you talk about all these things and the way you treat them, if we go to the source, the people that are actually doing the trafficking, what kind of education can we give to the people that are trafficked? And those that are thinking about trafficking, what kind of deterrent can we give them that if you come into New York State, you're gonna have a problem?
Well, that would be stronger laws.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, but I'm asking
ultimately-
specifically, what kind of law would you think would do that?
Well, to the undersheriff's point, is them being able to be held.
Yeah.
When the perpetrator is arrested,
Consequences.
that they get held.
They won't even come forward because they
Yeah.
know it's not
I
gonna go
mean,
anywhere.
that would help.
We recently had a case with someone who was incarcerated for drugs and was released and had actually made a comment and said that if I had known it was this easy to traffic children, I never would have sold drugs.
Yeah, that's.
It's easier.
But that's what we're
and there's
hearing.
no
Well, that
penalty
that
for
goes
it.
back to where you start. It's easier to traffic people than counterfeit bills jerseys.
So I think going back to where we start then has to be teaching consent and basic sex ed as early as possible and understanding what's expected in healthy sexual relationships from the get-go.
Which
On
then
top of
goes back
something
to
else.
funding.
Prioritize our children
Children.
and families.
Right.
You know,
Funding.
and keeping perpetrators somewhere that a family, or a child, we have the opportunity to run our course of doing safe assessments and getting them somewhere safe and building that rapport so that they are safe.
How about repeat offenders? So you guys get them, we lose them, they grab them again. Well, I mean, those are the kind of things that we look at.
Right.
For instance, even with domestic violence, one of our proposals was that if you committed domestic violence in front of a minor, there was a more serious charge than if it was just between you and your partner. Because then that's, as you guys would know, learned trait and all those kind of things. That's what I'm talking about. So now we know that there's a trafficker. We may have identified him, hopefully, and now he's he or she is a repeat offender. Would that help you?
I think what would be helpful, we talked about loan forgiveness for attorneys. How about loan forgiveness for social workers? Get more mental health folks trained in the problematic sexual behavior therapy that does have evidence-based results. And if I'm a social worker, I have 5.5 years in with my loan forgiveness, I got 4.5 left, that sucks,
I
right?
just consolidated, so I started over again. So I've been in for 10 years,
That's
and it
nice.
doesn't matter.
What you guys are talking about has been one of our proposals in the past for mental health workers, because every school needs more mental health
But
workers.
I think you have to be careful about how you define mental health workers.
No,
Right.
that's true, but I'm saying the example is, we'll forgive your loans, which is a great idea, because you do this kind of work.
Right.
So identify for me what kind of work.
Well,
Victim services.
There's a
Yeah,
loan,
victim services.
there's a loan forgiveness program, right, for
Public service.
licensed social workers in certain populations.
Yes.
I've worked in child welfare for 27 years.
God
I
bless
got my
you.
master's degree in 2004 and started applying for loan forgiveness. As soon as it-
Real quick.
Don't talk
about it.
We're prioritizing that need, but I think that the laws have to deter people from, like you're saying, becoming, let's not make child trafficking easier than drug dealing.
Right, I mean, that's my point. So if that part of education, so if you're going to do this, this will be happening to you
Right.
when we catch you.
Right, but we also have to be realistic about that child trafficking still mostly occurs by someone that is embedded in
It's
that
still,
family.
there's still the element
So
of
they may or
child
may
abuse.
not be the caretaker of a child,
You know-
but they have embedded themselves somehow in that family. So that people believe that, if they let their child go into the bathroom at Wegmans by themselves, they're going to be trafficked out of the bathroom. That isn't where this is happening.
In their living room.
But the problem with that is it's a trust issue. The people you trust are the ones that are going to
So
betray you.
how do we then do the preventive side?
Right, how do we teach people how to help
That's what I was
relationships?
asking, where is the deterrent on the education?
And what these red flags are, and that when you are a victim of trauma, you are more likely to end up in a situation that causes trauma for your own children, or to perpetuate that trauma for yourself over and over.
Thank you, Katie.
Ken?
We're gonna,
I think
I want to make a real quick comment
Sure.
about funding, so sorry.
You're good.
At the height of our prevention program in 2018, when we were working with our state police partners, we trained over 10,000 people, which is, in a year's time for a small agency in Niagara County, is a really big number. We had a full-time prevention educator who spent their entire time being saturated in the school system, developing MOUs, becoming almost an extension of the school staff. It operated so well. They were able to defer kiddos and recognize them, and our hotline was ringing off the hook. We had the most referrals that we've ever had. Since we lost that full-time prevention educator, because like Shelley was saying earlier, it wasn't even one person's full-time salary or fringe benefits, we couldn't sustain it, and so now it's just an additional job responsibility of one of our other caseworkers who does 99 million things already, and so we haven't been able to be as saturated. There are 13 school districts in Niagara County, and there are 2 people in my program. So it's me and one other person for rape crisis. So we are tackling all of this for just 2 people. So funding was huge, and having that partner with the state police was huge.
when did OCFS cut that funding to 35,000 and what was it?
It's been cut by small increments over the last three years. So
Okay.
the OCFS funding, the safe harbor funding, actually goes to the your county Department of Social Service, and then they have the ability to contract it out.
Okay.
There's other opportunities for funding, but I think the funding for safe harbor is the same as the funding for all other victim services, is that the funding sources themselves are very siloed and they don't work well with each other. So you can get funding from, like the CACS funding from New York State Office of Victim Services. They have their own rules, they have their own criteria, they have their own calendar year. We have funding from Office of Child and Family Services, we have funding through a number of other services. There's DCJS or DOCS funding sometimes that can be utilized. OPD, OPWDV, DD, all of the things.
Okay.
OMH, all of them.
So more communication from
But there's no
funding sources.
funneling,
Got
like,
it.
even right now, like, we have this meeting that we're at, which means we're not at OCFS's anti-trafficking summit, because even that, like, just, everyone doesn't talk to each other.
Yeah.
And 2 weeks ago, we had an OCFS Safe Harbor Coordinators meeting, so every county was represented, whatever that word is, with 2 of their anti-trafficking folks, which would have been a great opportunity for you all to be there to hear all of us in one room.
Yeah. All right, we are now at the point where our members are gonna make closing remarks. Go ahead, Josh.
I mean, I think I said enough words, so thank you all for, thank you all for, not just for being here, but for what you do. In today's society, not enough people give a damn, and you all clearly very much give a damn, so thank you.
Good, well put.
Well, it's hard to top that, right? Thank you. I just, really quick, I just wanted to talk about, we were talking about hotlining. Fun fact for all of you here, so you know kind of what we're dealing with when we take up the 11,000 or so bills that get introduced into the assembly each year. One of them, which we were able to block last year, said that if somebody made a hotline call, it would only be referred on by the state central register if the person left their name and phone number. Honest to God. And we were able to block that bill, and there was a huge, huge push to get that to the floor. So, I mean, I want you, this has been so wonderful for me because it's tapped back into my history, my work history as an attorney to some extent, even though I did that for a certain number of years. And it's just, it's so good to know that we have people, you know, of your quality that are out there doing this really, really hard work. And just know that, you know, where we sit, I feel like I'm getting a lot out of every one of these task force meetings, and I just appreciate you. So thank you for doing what you're doing. And as Brian kept saying, if you could follow up, because, and we're getting that, people that couldn't be here or couldn't be to a prior one are submitting, you know, statements, testimony, information, really, like, we'll take it. We're really happy to get it, so thank you.
Thank you, Mary Beth. David?
I really want to thank you for coming out. This is very enlightening. The fact that our family's been involved for a dozen years on the ground, so to speak, and in foreign countries has been, everything you've said is really important. What frustrates me is, without getting into the politics, is that politics plays so much of this in New York State. Your funding, which I've been advocating for 12 years on a lot of different levels. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people who think a lot differently than we do at this table. Prop 1, right there, is a wide open example of it. Bail reform, raise the age. We have mentioned this to everyone in the Assembly and in the Senate. We've fought, exposed this. This is what's going to happen, not what could happen, what's going to happen. It's fallen on deaf ears. So I'm really proud that everybody is here. The one thing I took out of this is more collaboration. I would love to see everyone here start working together, exchange cards. What can we do to help? And where can we literally laser focus on funding that instead of helps one group can help 3 of you together?
Yeah.
Because that's really what we're going to need to do. We have to laser focus. I always tell people, when you divide people out into all these different groups, you rarely win. It's only when you come together. And I think that's what I took out of this. So I really want to thank you for all being here.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you for hosting us.
Sure.
Joe?
Well, I only have a few things to say. The first 2 words are thank you, and God bless you all for what you do.
Thank you, Joe. Just to end things on a positive note, because this is a tough subject to talk about. And the reason why, a task force like this hasn't been created is because people are not comfortable talking about this issue. I mean, what David and his family does every day is amazing, but it's very, very, very rare because there's always such a focus on other issues that are less difficult to talk about. Or, like you said, when you talk to school districts, no, that doesn't happen here. And that stigma needs to go away. We want to play a role in doing that. And we want to play a role in making these solutions bipartisan and or nonpartisan. Our report is, like Joe said, is going to come out, it's going to have facts. It's going to be your words, it's going to be recommendations, it's going to be collaborative. And the last thing I will say is, when it comes to the ideas that we come up with, we'd love to not just, like Josh said, use our best, ability as an elected official. No, our job's to learn. Our job is to empower the people in this room and then enact laws and make recommendations that make sense. So please send us your best, and we will do our best as well.